Martha never liked Tuesdays. Something about the middle of the week always made her feel unmoored, neither here nor there. But that Tuesday started just like any other. The scent of coffee wafted through the kitchen. The radio murmured low in the background, playing an old hymn her husband loved. She heard John shuffle into the room in his worn-out slippers, clearing his throat the same way he had every morning for 38 years. "Morning, Marty," he said with that sleepy grin. She turned from the sink, smiling. "I over-toasted the bread again." "Perfect," he winked, sitting down with a chuckle. "Just how I like it. Crispy enough to defend against burglars." They ate in quiet comfort, the way long married couples do. No need for constant chatter. Their silence was full of knowing glances, little nods, and the occasional shared smirk. John kissed her cheek before heading out to water the azaleas, his pride and joy. "Don't forget, doctor's appointment tomorrow," she called after him. "Wouldn't dare," he replied. That was the last thing he ever said to her. 20 minutes later, she found him collapsed beside the hose, face pale, lips blue. She screamed his name. The paramedics came quickly, but it didn't matter. The hospital lights were too bright, the waiting room too cold, and the words the doctor used, "massive cardiac arrest," sounded like static in her ears. John was gone. Just like that, no goodbye, no warning, no slow decline, just coffee and toast, then silence. The next hours were a blur. Calls to family, arrangements, condolences from people she hadn't spoken to in years, hugs that felt too light for the weight she carried in her chest. At the funeral, she didn't cry. Not really. She shook hands, nodded, sat stiffly as the pastor read Psalm 23. She even smiled politely when someone said, "He's in a better place." But inside, Martha felt nothing. Or maybe she felt everything, all at once. So much that she couldn't tell grief from anger, love from guilt, memory from dream. That night, the house felt wrong, too quiet. His slippers were still by the door, his glasses still on the nightstand, the bed too big, the air too still. She crawled under the blanket and stared at the ceiling, listening to the ticking clock, the wind brushing the window, and the ache in her chest that refused to fade. She whispered, "God." But the rest of the sentence never came. There was no prayer, just silence. The days after the funeral didn't feel like days. They were more like fog, thick, gray, formless. One bled into the next. The clock ticked, the sun rose and set, but Martha stayed still. She didn't open the curtains, she didn't answer the phone. She let the coffee pot gather dust. The neighbors were kind. They left casseroles on her porch. A woman from church brought flowers and a card that read, "God gives peace." But Martha didn't feel peace. She felt abandoned. She sat in the same chair every day, the one by the fireplace with John's old flannel shirt draped over the arm. It still smelled like him. Faint cologne, a trace of lavender from the dryer sheet. She would close her eyes, breathe it in, and for a second pretend he was just in the next room. But then the silence would roar back in, louder than grief. Her daughter called from out of state. "Mom, are you eating?" Martha hesitated. "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine." "I just need time." But Martha didn't know what she needed. What she wanted was the impossible, for time to reverse. For one more morning of burnt toast and soft laughter. For his voice to call out, "Marty, where's my gardening hat?" Instead, all she had were echoes. She stopped going to church. People meant well, but their sympathy felt like noise. She didn't want to explain her sadness. Didn't want to hear, "He's with God now," when all she wanted was for him to be with her. Worse than the sorrow was the emptiness. Prayer, once a daily rhythm, became foreign to her lips. The words didn't come. When she tried, it felt like speaking into a vacuum. Was God even listening? Or worse, had he turned away? One afternoon, while folding laundry she hadn't touched in weeks, Martha found one of John's old flannel shirts. The buttons were mismatched. She used to tease him about that. She held it to her chest and sank into the bed. That's when the tears came. Not the polite ones she cried at the funeral, but real, shaking sobs that came from the gut, from the part of her that had been holding it all in. She clutched the shirt and whispered into the fabric, "I don't know who I am without you." It was the truest thing she'd said in weeks. Later that day, she sat outside for the first time since the funeral. The garden looked untamed, John's flowers drooping from thirst, azaleas wilting, leaves browning. He would have hated to see them like that. Her neighbor Linda walked over with a tray of lemon bars and 2 glasses of iced tea. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. Then Linda spoke. "You know, after my husband passed, I thought I'd never feel anything again. But one night when I was just sitting in my kitchen, I heard this voice in my spirit. Not loud, not with words, but it said, 'You're not alone.'" Martha looked down. "I wish I could feel that." "You will," Linda said gently. "God doesn't rush us. He waits with us." That night, as Martha lay in bed, she didn't pray, not quite, but she whispered something soft into the darkness. "If you're still there, Lord, I miss him. I miss who I was with him. It wasn't much, but it was something." It had been nearly a month. The azaleas were gone. The lemon bars left by Linda had grown stale on the counter. Martha's daughter had called less, not out of neglect, but because each call ended in silence. Martha had started talking to John, not aloud, but in her head. She'd sit in her favorite chair and say things like, "You'd hate how quiet this place is," or "I wore your flannel today, still smells like you." It helped somehow, pretending he was listening. One afternoon, she decided to tackle the hallway closet. Not out of energy, but because grief makes strange demands. Some days, it wants stillness, others, it demands motion. She opened the door and breathed in the old scent of books, dust, cedar, and paper. On the top shelf sat a box, nothing marked on it, just a faded lid and yellowing edges. Inside, photos, old church bulletins, handwritten grocery lists, and John's sloppy scrawl. And at the bottom, wrapped in a blue cloth, was his Bible. It was heavier than she remembered. Black leather cracked at the spine, a red ribbon bookmark stuck out somewhere near Isaiah. She ran her fingers over the cover, then sat down on the floor, cross-legged like a child. She hadn't opened a Bible since the funeral. Not because she stopped believing, but because her faith had gone quiet, like a piano left untouched. She opened to the page marked by the ribbon, Isaiah 46. Her eyes landed on a verse underlined in fading blue ink, John's handwriting unmistakable. "Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he. I am he who will sustain you. I have made you and I will carry you." She stared at it, once, twice, a third time, and something inside her, something small and fragile, shifted. She remembered when John had first read that verse aloud to her. They were both in their early 50s. He had just recovered from back surgery, and she'd found him on the porch reading that very passage. "I like this one," he had said. "It means God doesn't retire from loving us." She had laughed then, said something like, "Well, good, because I'm gonna need extra support when we're old and cranky." Now she was old and cranky and alone. Except, maybe she wasn't. She read the verse again. "Even to your old age, I will sustain you." She felt something warm slide down her cheek, a tear. Not from pain, from memory, from hope. She held the Bible to her chest and whispered, "John, did you leave this for me? Or did God?" Maybe it didn't matter, because in that moment it felt like both. That night, for the first time in weeks, Martha prayed. Really prayed. No scripts, no fancy words, just breath and tears and whispered thanks. "God, I don't know what's next, but thank you for not letting go." The house was still quiet, but this time, the silence felt full, not empty. It had been 3 days since Martha found the verse. 3 days since she let her soul breathe again. She'd begun doing small things, things that once seemed impossible. She made coffee, just 1 cup. She watered the remaining plants. She answered her daughter's call and even managed a full conversation. The ache hadn't disappeared, but it was no longer paralyzing. Something had shifted, like a door left ajar, letting light peek through. On Friday morning, as she opened her mailbox, she noticed an envelope with no return address. Handwritten, neatly, carefully, her name. Just Martha. The handwriting looked familiar. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her breath catching in her chest. The letter was dated 5 weeks ago. It was from John. She sank onto the porch step, the sun warming her shoulders as she unfolded the paper. Marty, if you're reading this, it means I'm not with you anymore. And that breaks my heart. Because more than anything, I wanted to grow old with you. Sit on the porch with matching canes and grumble about the price of tomatoes. But life and God sometimes have other plans. I asked our neighbor Linda to hold this letter, just in case. Not because I knew, but just in case. Martha, I want you to listen to me now more than ever. You are still alive. You are still breathing. And that means God still has a purpose for you. I've watched you love people in quiet, powerful ways. I've seen your compassion heal others, even when you didn't realize it. Don't shut that part of you down. Don't hide behind grief. Let God use you again. I'll miss you every second, but I'll be cheering you on, every step. And when the time comes, I'll be waiting, flannel shirt and all. Love you always, John. Martha didn't cry at first. She just sat there, eyes fixed on the letter, as if absorbing every word into her bloodstream. The world around her went quiet. The birds, the breeze, even her own thoughts. Then slowly tears came, not crashing, not wild, just soft and steady, like rain after a long drought. She pressed the paper to her heart and whispered, "You remembered. You knew I'd need this." It felt like God had sent the letter at the exact moment her heart had opened just enough to receive it. Not a moment sooner, not a moment too late. Later that day, she walked next door. Linda opened the door with a knowing smile. "You got it," she said softly. "You held it all this time." Linda nodded. "John asked me to send it when you were ready." Martha looked at her, eyes shimmering. "How would you know when I was ready?" "I didn't," Linda said. "I just felt it last night, like a nudge, like God whispered, 'Now.'" That night, Martha placed the letter on her nightstand beside John's glasses and Bible. She turned off the light, and for the first time in weeks, she slept, deeply, peacefully, without waking up from the weight of grief. It started with the garden. One morning, Martha put on John's old sun hat and stepped outside with a watering can. The azaleas were nearly gone, but the soil still held warmth. She pulled weeds, trimmed back brittle stems, and whispered apologies to each bloom he once cherished. "Let's try again," she said softly. And she wasn't just talking to the flowers. Then came the invitation. Linda mentioned that the church's grief support group was restarting. "You don't have to say anything," she offered. "Just come and sit." Martha hesitated, but something inside her, maybe John's voice, maybe the verse she couldn't stop rereading, said, "Go." That Tuesday, she sat in the back row of a circle of folding chairs, hands folded, heart pounding. A young woman named Rachel began to speak. She had just lost her husband in a car accident. They had only been married 2 years. "I don't think I know how to live without him," Rachel said, voice cracking. And suddenly, Martha knew exactly what to say. She didn't plan it, but the words came. "I used to sit in this same chair," Martha began. "I thought my life ended when my husband did, but one day I opened his Bible and found a verse he'd underlined." She quoted Isaiah 46:4, slowly, carefully. "Even to your old age and gray hairs, I will sustain you." Rachel began to cry, but this time they weren't hopeless tears. They were the kind of tears that say, "You see me, you understand." From that moment, Martha knew. Her grief hadn't been wasted. It had prepared her, softened her, so she could sit beside others in their darkness and offer light. She didn't become a preacher. She didn't start a ministry, But she did something more radical. She kept showing up. Every Tuesday, with Kleenex in her purse, tea in her thermos, and scripture tucked gently in her heart. Months passed. The garden bloomed again. Martha invited Rachel over for lunch one Sunday. They laughed about how neither of them could cook for one person. "I still talk to John sometimes," Martha confessed, smiling. Rachel nodded. "I talk to Mike too." "Does it help?" "Sometimes," Rachel said, "but mostly you do." One evening, Martha sat on her porch with a journal open. She wrote, "I used to ask God, why am I still here? Now I ask him, how can you use me while I am?" She looked up at the sky, painted orange and gold, and whispered, "Thank you for not being done with me yet." If you had met Martha just months earlier, you would have seen a woman drowning in silence, shattered by loss. But now she was proof that love doesn't die, that grief can be sacred, and that God still writes new chapters, even for the brokenhearted. So if you're still breathing, friend, you're not finished. God still has a reason for your life, even in your old age, even through the gray hairs, even through the silence, because he who made you, he will carry you. If this story touched your heart and you want to hear more powerful stories of faith, healing, and hope, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next journey we share together. I truly believe God is still working miracles every day, and maybe the next story we tell could be yours.